What's up, everybody? Welcome to your video lesson on creating the American nation after the Revolutionary War. So remember that up to this point, we've been talking about the French and Indian War and how it caused the revolution. Also, the Proclamation of 1763 that didn't allow Americans to move into that land west of the Appalachians that they had just fought for. And then taxation without representation, the Stamp Act, the Townsend Act, the Intolerable Acts, the Boston Tea Party. So remember that, or in the Boston Massacre. So remember that the Revolutionary War breaks out because of these things. Then the American Revolutionary War is fought for a span of something like 6 years. And because of the leadership of George Washington, because of the battle techniques, guerrilla warfare, being willing to do things that Britain is not able to do because they are so big, and then remember the Republican motherhood, the role of women in this war, sort of shaping, creating things, and then also the role of, to a lesser extent, enslaved Africans in this war. So eventually America will become free, and I want to really quick make sure that I mention, during this war, the Declaration of Independence is signed. The Declaration of Independence is merely asserting our independence from Great Britain. It is a different document than the Constitution, which is what we are mostly going to be talking about today. So remember that the Constitution is not the original Constitution of America. The original Constitution is going to be the Articles of Confederation. This will go from 1781, when it is ratified, until 1789, when the new U.S. Constitution is ratified. Remember that famously, these revolutionaries have lived underneath a very tyrannical king, so they are very worried about, now that they are running the joint, now that daddy's gone, we need to run the house. So how do we want to do that? And one thing that these guys are very afraid of is somebody too strong at the top who can pretty much do whatever he wants. So you get the Articles of Confederation. And the Articles of Confederation are going to give too much power to the state and not enough power to the federal government. And a whole lot of debate is about to happen about how much power is too much for the federal government and how much power is too much for state and local governments. So the Articles of Confederation are not going to have the ability to raise an army or raise taxes, and that is going to be the crux of the problem and why the new U.S. Constitution is going to be so necessary. Remember that after the Revolutionary War, the American government is tremendously in war debt, and the states and federal government are going to have to figure out how to pay that debt. So a lot of farmers at this time are extremely frustrated that their farms are being foreclosed on, their taxes are being raised by the state government, and this leads to Shays' Rebellion, which is an uprising of Massachusetts backwood farmers. Now, in order to stop this rebellion, George Washington has to raise a militia, but it shows pretty quick that the American government does not have an army, and you kind of need that. Also, it doesn't have the ability to sort of uniformly raise taxes. And that's why in 1787, you are going to get the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia. In that same year, you're going to get the Land Ordinance and the Northwest Ordinance, because as soon as the Americans get this land, they're going to start looking west and saying, you know what, I want me some of that land. So what the Northwest Ordinance is going to do is create a uniform way for Americans to settle the Western territory that they now own. So you're going to have to create schools when you move west. You're going to have to purchase that land from the federal government. And you're also going to have to decide, we're going to have to figure out, okay, which of these states are going to be free states and which are going to be slave states. And that is going to be a big debate moving forward all the way up into the Civil War. So the extension of slavery is going to be forbidden into the Old Northwest. But moving back to the Constitutional Convention, we look at the Constitution now and we feel like, man, this is a wonderful document. I can't believe how perfect this is. But at the time, the Constitution was seen with a whole lot of skepticism, and that's why the Constitution is seen as a bundle of compromises. So the first compromise, and a really, really massive one, is the question of, okay, for slave states, Do you count those slaves as part of the population? Do you count them as a full person? What do you do? Do you not count them as a person at all? And this leads to the 3/5 compromise, and that means that slaves are going to count as 3/5 of a person in a state's population. And speaking of population, you've got a real problem, because do you want states like Virginia and New York to have all the power? What about the little states like New Jersey? And that leads to the Great Compromise, which is a combination of what we call the Virginia Plan, that would give the biggest states all the power, and then the New Jersey Plan, which would basically say that all states are equal no matter what, and that doesn't exactly work either. So we get the Great Compromise, which gives us the Senate and the House of Representatives. The Senate is going to be based on equal representation for each state, and the House is going to be based on population. In addition to all of this, you are also going to get the executive branch, which is going to give you the president. And at the Constitutional Convention, when this discussion is going on, everybody knows whenever this president is created, that president is going to be George Washington, who is actually presiding over the Constitutional Convention as a whole. So the way that Americans are going to vote for this is through the Electoral College, which is semi-direct, not exactly direct representation. What happens is that each state has a certain number of representatives who are going to cast their vote for whoever their state voted for. Now, instantly, you are going to start to get a political split in people who think we should do things this way and people who think we should do things this way. Famously, just about everybody at this time is against political parties. George Washington, the most of all of these, George Washington is completely against political parties. And then you even hear quotes from people like Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson saying that they don't want political parties, but promptly you are going to see the Federalists, who are very much in favor of the Constitution. They want a strong central government, and then the Anti-Federalists, who are still in favor of the Articles of Confederation. So what we're going to do to sort of assuage these people is that James Madison, who could find some common ground with each side here, he is going to create the Bill of Rights and tack it onto the Constitution, basically saying, yes, this is our Constitution, but in addition to that, these are the fundamental rights of Americans. Eventually, the first political parties are going to consolidate into the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans. Alexander Hamilton will be the face of the Federalists, and Thomas Jefferson will be the face of the Democratic Republicans. For the Federalists, what they want is rule by a wealthy class, not necessarily by the legions of people in America. They want a strong central federal government. They want to emphasize industry and manufacturing. They also want a more loose interpretation, sort of a moving interpretation of the Constitution with what we will call implied power. This is a really important point and a really contentious point. So, Alexander Hamilton wants to create a national bank that will absorb the debts of all of the individual states and give those debts to the federal government so that the federal government can open a new line of credit that is going to give them much more prestige on the world stage and sort of make them more competitive, okay? So, in order to do this, the Constitution does not say that you can create a national bank. But Alexander Hamilton says, well, the Constitution says you can do what's in the best interest of the country, and that is what this is. It is an implied power of the Constitution, because the Constitution also doesn't say you can create a Coast Guard, but we have one of those. Thomas Jefferson is going to say you can't just say that the Constitution implies something and then make it so. But ironically enough, Thomas Jefferson will use this same argument whenever he buys the Louisiana Territory, because the Constitution does not say that you can just buy a big old branch of territory from a foreign country. But Thomas Jefferson says, well, it implies that you can do what you need to do. So this debate is going to be raging on for basically ever. The debate over small government versus big government, the debate over what the Constitution says you can or cannot do. So what we're going to be looking at next is the Washington administration from 1788 to 1796, because George Washington chooses to step down after 2 terms, and then the Adams administration from 1796 to 1800, which will be followed by probably the most important of all the administrations, the Jefferson administration. So, get ready. These debates are going to continue for a long, long time.
Only Jesus! Only Jesus!